I'm really pleased to launch our first research and innovation event, and one of the first events that we've done under the Frank Williams Academy. It would be very amiss of me not to mention the Frank Williams element to the Academy. It was launched in April 2023 to, of course, honour Frank Williams himself and the support that he provided to SIA. So the Academy, for those who haven't heard much about us already, focuses on 4 key areas. It focuses on healthcare professional training, SIA's knowledge hub and education and support we provide to those living with a spinal cord injury, research and innovation, which is what I'm hoping has brought you to today's event, and you've not strayed into a meeting that you weren't sure what it was about. And then lastly, the section that very much links with research and innovation is how we can take data, information receiving, research that's being undertaken, and how can we bring about policy and health influencing change across the sector from within. We, of course, here at SIA have our comms and campaigning team that very much go in at parliamentary level and focus on bringing about change at a government level. But of course, we are also wanting to support bringing about change directly in the NHS, and therefore our policy and health influencing manager very much focuses on some of that activity. All of this work fits into our wider strategy within SIA, and of course I've displayed that in fairly small format for you on the screen, so I'm not going to hover on this slide for very long. Our vision and our goals are ultimately that we believe everybody living with a spinal cord injury should have and be able to have a fulfilled life, and we want to support by being the expert guiding voice for life after spinal cord injury. And then, of course, we have our goals, and very much from the point of view of where the Academy fits and focuses on some of that is around the health and care system that works. And then, of course, we have our pillars as part of our charity as well. And of course, very much the Frank Williams Academy sits under pillar 3, which is build vital specialist expertise across the health and care sector. So that's very much looking at the 4 areas I've already spoken about. So training in healthcare professionals, the support and education that we provide to those living with a spinal cord injury, and the research and development and the policy and practice elements. And of course, the most important and one of the things that we'll constantly keep in our minds is how do we keep people at the heart of what we do and what we're focusing on. So I wanted to give just a brief introduction as to how this event links into the wider work we're doing, and of course how it links with the Academy as well. I'm very shortly going to hand over to my colleague Ashley, who's going to talk about the flow and structure of the afternoon and what you can expect to see. I'm hoping many of you have received a breakdown of some of the sessions that we're going to go through this afternoon. We are very much focusing on, from a research point of view, we're very much focusing on supporting people to live beyond a spinal cord injury rather than a curative sense. So it feels very important to set some of the tone from that respect. But as I said, I am going to hand over to my colleague Ashley, who's going to introduce some of the team that are supporting the event this afternoon, and also give a breakdown of the activity you can expect to undertake.
Hi, so hi there, so yeah, okay, sorry. On the call today, we have a variety of people from SIA. We have Mark Riddler, who's our Director of Programs, who's waving now, if you can see him. You have myself, who's the Impact Manager, Lewis Petty, who is the Policy and Health Influencing Manager, We have Karen, who is our Academy Coordinator, and who will be manning the chat for us. Simon Pinnell, who's our Business and Enterprise Manager, and Sam Hayden, who is our Communications Coordinator. So you'll be hearing a lot from Mark later and Karen later, and the others will be helping us as we move along with some of the activities we have planned for today. So when we planned today, we were looking at how can we find out more information about what we need in terms of research and innovation. So in today's session, we were looking to bring together clinicians, research organizations, and a variety of charities to from across the sector to develop an understanding of the challenges that are being experienced by clinicians, the data that we need, and existing research that's happening. We also thought it'd be a really good opportunity to look at research priorities for the future, understand the need for centralized data, and look at the ways that SIA can support future research opportunities. So we're really excited to see how we can use this session to do that. In terms of the agenda, you guys have had a flavour of what we're gonna have this afternoon. We've had our introduction where we've just kind of looked over what the Academy looks like and the nature of the organisation, the nature of the event. What's going to happen next is we're going to look at the current challenges and how research can be used in a campaign for change. Afterwards, we're going to have a discovery panel where we're going to explore existing spinal cord injury research. And we've got some really exciting people for that. So I'm very excited to introduce you to everyone there. After that, we're going to have a brief break. Then we're going to look at the lived experience point of view, where our Director of Programs, Mark Riddler, is going to provide some insights for us. And then I'm going to pass back to the head of the Academy to talk about innovation and how that can be used to bring about change. Towards the end, we'll be looking at getting a Q&A, and so you can ask questions throughout. We'll try and gather your questions from the chat as we go, but if you put them in, we'll definitely get to them before the end of the session. And we'll also look at gathering some feedback from you all as well. So if we move swiftly into the first session, we all know that there are current challenges when looking at spinal cord injury care. The current challenges are they're existing, but we don't necessarily have a centralized way of talking about them. So what we thought would be really good is to have breakout room discussions where we can discuss them in a broken down way, gather some insights into what the existing challenges are, what data we need to kind of support this notion, and then what we think research priorities should be as a result of that. You don't need to worry about remembering all of that because the members of SIA who are on this call are going to have the questions on hand and they're going to help you guys facilitate the conversations. But we are really eager to get meaningful conversation flowing where we can hear what you guys think about the existing challenges in spinal cord injury research. So what will happen shortly is you will be put in a breakout room with a facilitator from SIA, and they'll have these questions. They'll be able to facilitate conversation with you all. And we're really excited to get some of your insights into what the current challenges are in spinal cord injury research.
I'll shortly be opening the room, so you'll get an invitation to join. Hopefully you'll receive all of that. If not, please let me know.
Can you hear me better? Excellent. Harvey. Hello?
Okay, so that session was really insightful in my group. I hope it was as insightful for the rest of you in your groups. The next section of this is going to be a panel discussion, and we do have some really interesting speakers lined up. So we have Suzanne Guest, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Bolton. We have Helen Hobbs, who is the founder of Hobbs Rehabilitation. We have Shadia Shahid, who is the Clinical Research Network Manager at Spinal Research, and Rob Tyler, who is a trustee at the Inspire Foundation. So if you just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so we'll start with a brief introduction from each of the individuals and a bit of an insight into what field of SCI research that they work on. And we can start with Suzanne Guest.
Hi, I'm a PhD researcher. I'm looking at the peer support groups after spinal injury. And one of the things I helped set up the Greater Manchester group, and that model's been rolled out across the country. And one of the things is just looking at, are these groups effective? Do they actually support people long term?
Amazing, thank you. Next, we can hear from Helen Hobbs.
Hi, I'm not directly just involved in spinal cord injury research, but at Hobbs we work with the Mint Academy, and we do a lot of clinical trials, testing devices, looking at effectiveness of devices as in rehab technologies. So I'm indirectly involved with quite a lot of spinal patients, trying out different devices and looking at the secondary benefits and the development of technology for future use. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you. Next to Shadia.
Hi everyone, my name is Shadia and I work at Spinal Research as their Clinical Research Network Manager. So at Spinal Research, our primary area of focus is improving independence and working towards restoring function for people with spinal cord injury. So that's the area of research that we're most focused on. And then separately to that, as the Clinical Research Network Manager at Spark, we're working on facilitating clinical research activity across the UK. We want to sort of support collaboration, which is inclusive to both clinicians and academics. And what we want to do is build an effective clinical research network that can eventually support the development of a clinical trial network so that all the UK rehab centres can come together to engage in clinical trial activity.
Fantastic. And finally, we have Rob.
Are you muted, Rob?
Sorry, I'll start again. Yes, sorry. Yes, my name is Robert Tyler. I'm a trustee and lay member of the scientific committee for the Inspire Foundation, which are based at Salisbury District Hospital. We fund really all aspects of rehabilitation therapies for spinal cord injury. We tend to focus on bladder, bowel, pain, and hand function. We did a lovely thing called freehand some years ago, which we're trying to reinvigorate, and we're now doing a lead project at the moment. Really, I suppose is stimulating the bowel to improve transit times. So we'll fund all aspects of spinal cord rehabilitation research rather than curative research.
Amazing, thank you. So we've got a wide range of research areas and focuses on the panel. And it'll be really exciting to hear the perspectives as we kind of delve into the questions. So when we look at SIA, we currently have a call to action, and we talk about creating an evidence base of best practice in rehabilitation, reintegration to society, treatment, and costs related to inadequate provision. How do you think that clinicians can lead the way in building this research base? Does anyone want to start?
I'm quite happy to. I think one of the things is first of all looking at the spinal injury community and asking them what they feel like their needs are. And then I suppose there's checking that things are working. So we've been doing things for a long time. Is this actually the right way to do them? And we're in a situation at the moment where things in terms of rehab are being done for political reasons. So that could be that people aren't accessing the spinal centres because of issues within the NHS. So I think we need to be looking at the outcomes of decisions that maybe haven't been as research based, so that we can start getting a better future, really.
Yeah, and I think I just add to that. I think we've all within the spinal community, clinicians, patients, everybody, families, have a duty to stay current and up to date. And I agree with what Suzanne said. So reflect at what we're doing and why we're doing it, and is it the best way forward? Science is developing and continually moving and changing, and new discoveries are happening all the time, as well as technology is speedily changing all our lives. And I think we need to be really current and up to date, so we're giving the right information. I have found myself personally in situations where the patients sometimes know more than we do because they've gone and done more up-to-date research around areas. And I think we all have an obligation to keep driving that forward for our patients and our clients.
Yeah, I think that's interesting actually, because from the peer support groups that we are getting an environment that people can share that knowledge with. Somebody has gone and done their research or found some new gadgets or a new service. There is an environment within the spinal injury community that people can share that information.
And I also think we've got to find a way to collect more data. We touched on this in our breakout group, but there isn't enough data out there. There's not enough evidence to say what we're doing is working well enough. And we need to find a way to join up the data. Both the medical scientific data and the clinical and the functional data need to be very much joined up, I think, as our outcomes. What we record within our clinical intervention, the diagnosis, the data on what improvements people get and what their outcome is when they're discharged, that data is not joined up enough. And the longevity of that data, I think, is also important over a longer period of time. In the community, I'm talking about people after they leave the spinal units as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that in terms of building the research base, it might be a little bit unfair to ask the clinicians to lead it per se. Sort of what Suzanne and Helen have touched on, I think it'll probably take lots of different diverse stakeholders. So for example, like Suzanne said, people from the SCI community, and then of course academic researchers to all come together and build this sort of research base across all these different areas that Ashley has kind of touched on. I know that in the NHS there's a huge focus on evidence-based practice, and I think going forward it'll be really important to kind of work with researchers to build up that evidence base. And I think in order to do that, like Helen's already said, we need good data. So I think ultimately it's really important that clinicians and other stakeholders work together to make sure that good data is being collected and that it's being made, accessible for analysis, especially where researchers are concerned, so that we can make sure that what we are doing is in line with kind of what the evidence supports.
I think that's accurate. Yes, but further than that, I think the research community doesn't actually reach out enough. Certainly from Inspire's point of view, hasn't been in our remit to reach out to patients with the results of our research. That's usually left down to the research graduates, the postgraduates, or the PhD students to publish their works. But I think we can do more to reach out and add to that database that actually we're all calling for in all sorts of different ways, in all of our different roles. And I think with Inspire, we're hoping to do that through a partnership with the SIA anyway. So I think yes, I think it is unfair to ask consultants to maintain that, or clinicians to maintain that. I think it is the responsibility really of the research community to announce or talk about what we're doing, and also to notify each other of changes in patient requirements, what research patients are asking for really. If patients aren't putting themselves forward for research, then there's no point in trying to fund that research really. And but so I think the research community can do more to talk about what we are doing. It's difficult to do it on our own because we have a limited readership, but the SIA has a much bigger readership, much bigger audience, and a little bit more political clout, because there's always a political aspect to these things. Yeah, we're hoping to join up with the SIA and do a little bit of that.
We at Hobbs are working with quite a lot of different ranges and different types of technologies with our patients, not looking at the secondary benefits, looking at changes of blood pressure, heart rate, prevention of osteoporosis, muscle strength, all sorts of things. So we as clinicians, at the moment, there are no guidelines for any therapist using any technology of any description, really. There's inclusion and exclusion criteria. So we're trying to develop a platform which is known as the Mint Logbook, which actually collects data at the point of clinical interaction with a patient using different devices as a starting point to try and work out a little bit more about what worked with which patient, when and why, what didn't work, so we can begin to get some evidence to formulate what should be future more in-depth research questions, but also to guide clinicians to what they might want to consider using with different patients who've got different clinical presentations, and looking at the additional benefits of someone doing something in a different way that they hadn't necessarily thought of, but another clinician might have done. It's just a starting point. So we're recording the actual intervention, the clinical reasoning behind the use of tech within clinical practice, and why that therapist chose to do that intervention at that time, and recording that data. So we're hoping to get some formulation of a database to start looking at that, because at the moment, there within the technology world I'm talking about, and I know that is it's becoming more available. Certainly across Europe and in America and Australia, they're using a lot more technology and devices than sadly we can have access to in the UK, but it is coming, and we will end up using a lot more of it.
I think it's interesting that Helen's talking about having sort of a lack of guidance, because one of the things, or one of the challenges that I had when we was looking at setting up the Greater Manchester support group, I went to the NICE guidelines to see what they said, and peer support's mentioned, but it basically just says that there should be some peer support, and there's no definition of what that looks like. So I think, part of my research is around sort of trying to get a working model of what that peer support should be, because it doesn't discuss whether it should be groups, individuals, mixture of both. So I think we probably do need more guidance, don't we, on how we can put things into practice, which I suppose it's chicken and egg, isn't it? We need the research to form the guidance.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any final points to add to that one, or should we move into the next question? I think it feeds in quite well. You're talking about the guidelines being not there for you, really. So I guess my question is, what role do you think innovation can play in spinal cord injury research and care as well? I'd be interested to hear, especially from the perspectives that you guys were all looking at it from. I'd be really interested in hearing what role you think innovation can play.
I'll go first. So I think there's a massive role for innovation because things are changing so fast. But it's the secondary benefits that I think using some of the technologies that are now out there that we need to explore, and the prevention of secondary problems. I'm looking at activity-based rehabilitation. We all know exercise is good for us. So actually, and the prevention of things like pressure sores, contractures, better control of your blood pressure, cardiovascular fitness, the management of spasticity, pain management. All of these things, I think, are areas that we should be researching more with some of the new technologies and the innovations that are coming into the modern world, but also not just that, but innovations into a more accessible, adaptive environments. You know, you can talk to Siri and you can find things out, and more adaptive controls, more accessible technologies that are giving more opportunities for people moving forward in more accessible sports, that sort of thing. I think there's a whole area that is really exciting, and it would be really interesting to research some of the overall secondary benefits of fitness, well-being and feel-good factor of being more active for a lot of our clients. And I think that's where innovation can play a huge role.
I think from a psychological point of view, one of the things that I was sort of thinking around with this question is that we haven't got loads of fancy equipment and that. But part of it is about looking back as well as looking forward. So when we set our groups up, the man who I set the group up with, John, he'd got an injury, and he was wanting to replicate the day centre within the spinal unit and create the support that was within that. So I think sometimes we look at the really fancy stuff, which obviously there is a place for, but sometimes it's looking at quite simple things and how they can provide the support. And one of the things with peer support is that there's always somebody that does lots of research. So the new equipment that's coming out, they're often really, they can be spread through the spinal support groups because one person's found them, and it goes through quite a simple word of mouth structure, rather than, you know, most people don't read peer-reviewed journals. So, you know, I think sometimes it's looking quite simple as well as looking at the technology.
Yeah, I think there's also a gap for disseminating the information, sharing patient experiences and clinician experiences by using innovative approach to communication. We've got the internet, but expanding on how that can reach out or contact people in different groups. Social platforms, perhaps, I'm not sure, but there must be innovative ways in which we can use technology to communicate with each other or impart our experiences jointly, perhaps.
Yeah, I think science and technology is moving so quickly. I think with the advent of things like big data and AI, which we're all probably a bit mystified and intrigued by, it has huge scope for playing a role in spinal cord injury research and care. I mean, there's all these different areas. So, for example, robotics, imaging, drug development. I think with all these different areas, it can kind of It can help us, for example, select the most responsive or most suitable candidates when it comes to, for example, clinical trials. It can help us develop more effective diagnostic techniques so that people can be stratified appropriately and put into, you know, various kind of categories depending on their very specific injury needs. And then ultimately, I think all these different areas can come together to hopefully improve the management and treatment of people with spinal cord injury. I think hopefully researchers will play a big part in helping us figure out how we can use all these different tools and how we can work in all these different areas to come together and impact the management of people with spinal cord injury, both, you know, during the acute and subacute stages, but also over the course of a patient's lifetime.
Yeah, it's recording and managing the data, isn't it? That's you know, once we get into sort of vast amounts of data, somebody's got to run it, somebody's got to organize it, somebody's got to collect it and record it, and to allow the machines to run through it. So a central point to, or central organization to record the data is kind of important, really, isn't it?
And it's got to be meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, and machine readable, yeah. Yeah.
Do we know what data is currently collected?
Like clinical data, I know we were talking in our group about the National Spinal Cord Injury Database in the NHS. And I think somebody's just put something about EMSCI. I know, so they're the European, I think, multi-center spinal cord injury network. They have different kind of parameters to compare to what's being collected at the moment in the UK. Again, I think EMSCI are more focused on research and different outcome measures. Sorry. So yeah, I think there's different data depending on where we're kind of looking, whether we're looking from a clinical perspective or a research perspective. There's lots of different data points.
Okay, another one.
Hey, baby.
Yeah, so that's the thing, isn't it? There's all these disparate groups collecting data, and nobody's bringing it all together. Perhaps the data is really out there, or a lot or much of it. Just got to bring it together. That's a research project in itself, really.
Yeah. I think there's also agreeing on the outcome measures as well, isn't it? So as people don't recover from spinal injury, they tend to adjust to it. It's looking at, you know, what would be a good outcome for somebody.
Yeah, and often clinical outcomes, or an outcome from a clinical perspective or research perspective, differs to the patient's perspective. You know, for pain control or something, somebody might say a 30% reduction in pain is successful, but a patient might want 100% or a 90% reduction in pain in order for it to be tolerable for them. Yeah, it's what the data means in the real world really has to come from patient anecdote, patient comment. So would help if patients had a way to review it as well and to give their input.
I can see that Jackie's put another link. I think it's for the ISCOS data, so the International Spinal Cord Injury Data Sets. So they've quite helpfully broken down things that should be collected almost, you know, as a mandatory, as a bare minimum. And then they've also added some additional parameters, which is really interesting. I think kind of to Helen's point, what are we collecting? I mean, I've had a very kind of brief look at what the National Spinal Cord Injury database is collecting in the UK. That's a referral database. And unfortunately, some of those mandated or bare minimum characteristics that have been described in that link that have been, you know, put out by ISCOS, we're not unfortunately meeting all of those. And yeah, I think to answer Helen's question, we're probably not collecting enough data, and I think we need to ask why, and maybe not so much what do we need to collect, but why aren't we collecting? Because I think the international kind of, societies and groups, they've set out pretty clear parameters for what we should be looking at, but for some reason there seems to be a gap in the UK.
Mm.
There's also, we have to remember also, in order for it to be taken up, really, is we have to look at the economics of it all. But I don't mean the economics of the data itself, but saving the cost of healthcare, the healthcare economics, where therapies, some are better than others, and which ones are saving providers the money, not costing the NHS more than it has done, really. Spinal injury is expensive and lifelong, and if we can reduce the burden of spinal cord injury to the providers of healthcare, then that'll help research as well, I think.
Do they need to review some of the pathways that are currently, because we know that there's a long wait and to get into the spinal units, and some patients never make it into a spinal unit. So should we be looking at changing the pathways so you get acute care within the spinal unit, and then there's step down ongoing rehab, that when somebody's more stable and they don't need to be in the such an acute setting, they could move on. And I wonder, because actually a lot of people are really missing out, aren't they? And they're blocking beds and in the acute hospitals because they're waiting for a bed in the spinal unit. Should we look at the whole pathway across the whole patient pathway?
Yeah, absolutely. Getting people in quicker from the patient point of view and from a clinician point of view is really important. I know that patients are sitting in trauma centres for a little too long and ending up with bad bowel routines, or poor bowel routines, which impacts their rehab. So yeah, speeding the whole thing up can certainly help patient welfare and reduce costs for providers as well. And having evidence of that would help. I think we do have the evidence of that, really, but it's implementing the policies on the back of that evidence is important, but that takes a political imperative, I think.
And I think one of the things that we talked about briefly in our breakout group was the integration of the healthcare budgets not being so separate at different stages of patient pathways, that if they can be more joined up, it's more of an ongoing pathway, that the funding doesn't stop and start and move on from someone else's responsibility.
Yeah.
Make a difference.
And someone in the chat has helpfully posted a paper that suggested, I believe it said £10 million saving if patients were in specialist units. So I guess we're not only looking at innovation, but we're also looking at how can we improve on what's already there in order to make sure that we can get the necessary information we need to do the research in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, culture of good data stewardship. Yeah, that's absolutely important. Yeah.
So as we kind of bring this towards a close, are there any other final points that you guys would like to make, whether it's in regards to innovation or the fields of spinal cord injury that you work in?
I think one of the things in terms of the peer support, we was discussing in our groups that there is the issues with the spinal centres not referring people to the groups, and we don't know it's because they don't know about us, because they don't see the value of us. So I think sometimes that communication needs to be looking at being improved so we can support people, on a journey past discharge from the unit.
Yeah, often it's just time, isn't it? people are so overworked really and so busy in spinal units. Having time for outpatients is difficult. For outpatients to come back is difficult, I think. We need a clinician's point of view on that, perhaps.
Do you think there's a place for more community-based specialist rehabilitation services that link closely into the spinal units? I know certainly the outreach programs are starting to happen, but actually the ongoing rehab pathways for patients after they come out of the acute unit in the community, I think, is another loop that we could really build on, because they're going home, they're coming out much earlier than they used to, and they've still got unmet rehab goals. So the education, I think, of community, more generic therapy in the community, being educated and upskilled for specialist spinal therapists as well.
It's almost more than that, somewhere that where patients can come back to. You know, if it's a sports group, even that can help patients chatting to each other and engaging in some peer support, can't it? Yeah, somewhere the patients can come back to and organise it amongst themselves with the clinician support would help, I think. So you kind of lose contact with spinal units once we're out, and it's not always the best thing when we need to have a little bit more patient education after our rehab. Yeah.
You've just had an additional comment in the chat from Claire Guy. Bob was right. Patients develop bowel and that then increase their stay on the spinal unit once they reach it, alongside the housing issues. If there was an overhaul of the pathways, we may find that there are enough spinal cord injury centre beds, all down to finance, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. But also the spinal injury units are, you know, they're all largely built sort of 30, 40 years ago, and they're struggling to perform. The buildings are struggling to perform, I think. There's a program of renewal is required in terms of the architecture. Patients many more patients are incomplete. So I think the buildings are struggling for that when they were built for patients who are completely wheelchair dependent. There's evidence certainly at Salisbury where the toilets weren't really suitable for ambulant people, but were more suitable for the sole use of shower chairs. So. Yeah.
Can I just add on to Rob's point there, actually, that as you've said, that the original spinal cord injury centres, they were built 30, 40 years ago, and they were based on the patient population at that time. And obviously the patient population has significantly grown, but it's not correlated with the increase in spinal cord injury beds. And certainly year on year, we've seen an increase in the number of spinal cord injury patients seen, but it doesn't seem to be correlating with the need from the spinal cord injury centres. So I think that from an infrastructure point of view, will always fall short because they've not been able to recalculate the need dependent on the population size. So it'd be interesting, you know, to see the comparable differences and see what that's like from now compared to 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's not just size, it's diversity as well. I mean, you know, many more different types of injury are coming in, many more incompletes who are having far more complex rehabilitation needs, really, I think, as well.
Also taking into account the aging process as well.
Yeah.
After spinal injury.
Absolutely.
Being
Absolutely,
able to access those services, and prevention of, maintaining that level of activity or physical health and well-being and strength.
Yeah. I think this is all part of SI's call for action plan, isn't it? I think.
And I think that is a good place to round off the discussion, unless anyone else has anything additional to say. The next thing, I'd like to thank all of you because you were really engaging and you also kept to time, which we all really like. So we've got a break now, so we are set to reconvene at 4:25. And what I'll do is I'll post the SIA call to action in the chat because it's been mentioned quite a few times, just in case anyone's not seen it already. But I will see you all at 4:25.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have, it seems like quite a few people have come back, so I will pass over to Mark Riddler. I'm so sorry.
Hello. Do we have a horrible echo? No, we don't.
No, it's good.
Excellent. And Rob, thank you. You can confirm that I can hear people as well, so that's great.
Yes.
I was mulling this morning on what I needed to talk about in this slot. And initially, I was thinking it was going about how does the sector know what research it can call upon, but was thinking that that was a bit narrow. And also, having been through the first part of this session, realized that it would be better to talk about the lived experience point of view and examine some of the opportunities and challenges that we face as a patient representative body and talk, looking at it positively, looking at the contribution that we think that we can better make. So firstly, I should say that we're quite new in the research and innovation space. We've been engaged in it off and on for a long time, but not really with a consistent, coherent plan as to how we could adequately engage. For instance, we've been involved in helping organizations recruit for specific academic studies and leveraging our membership to help and assist on that. But we've been quite poor at keeping in touch with those studies, keeping in touch with the people who are engaged in them, telling their stories, and reporting back to the membership. And so consequently, the engagement in those recruitment exercises are not as good as they could be, I think. Secondly, we have also dipped our toe in commissioning studies, and the most notable one was about 3 years ago about mental health, which was quite significant and certainly very significant in helping us design our services in the mental health space and our counselling service. But again, not in a consistent, regular fashion. So the Academy gives us an opportunity, really does. And partly because we've put more resource into it, but also because it's part of a coherent piece. It's connected to the work that we do through the education of healthcare professionals and also of people with lived experience. But also, really importantly, it's connected to the policy work that we're doing within the health and care system and the campaigning work that we're doing at Parliament and in the public relations space. But the more we do in that space, the more we realize that we need a better evidence base to make those arguments. Which then kind of leads us on to the call for action, because there's been a lot of talk this afternoon about pathways and improving those pathways and revising them. And that's one of the systematic changes that we're calling for in that call for action. But also there is the specific one about a coordinated national program of research and modelling and testing to create an evidence base, but effectively to create better outcomes, a better experience for people who are living with a condition. So then I was thinking about, well, how can we help? How can SIA make a positive contribution? Obviously, there's a massive academic and research infrastructure out there that exists. We're not trying to replicate that in any shape nor form, but we are trying to engage in it in a new and positive and structured fashion. And I thought really the summary of it was summarized by community navigation and translation. So talking about community first, one of the ways in which I think we can help better recruit for research and better engage a membership to inform, where appropriate, a co-production or co-design peer-led voice. We really are obviously a really good place to do that. We've got a large membership, over 10,000 people living with SCI, and it's growing and will continue to grow. We've also got established ways of communicating with them: direct mailing, The Voice, Forward Magazine, and other ways as well, the community groups, etc., etc. And I think we can leverage those methods of that relationship that we continue to build with our membership, but with a frame on research and innovation. But if we're going to do that, then it needs to be made really applicable to their experience, their lives, and their concerns. And that's going to come down to stories, I think. It's going to come down to making real and live what the academic exercises they've been engaged in, what good results have come out of it, what changes that they've made, in order to engage them to become involved in others. And I suspect that not everybody, or not all of our members are going to want to engage in that way, but I suspect that there's probably a fair-sized sub-community of our membership who would, and it's really want to explore that going forward. And then the second piece is about navigation. There's an enormous amount of information out there, but it's really difficult to find the bits that are relevant to you, the bits that you want to find. And I suspect there are gaps. Well, I know there are gaps, but what are those gaps, and how do you identify them relative? And the way you identify them is knowing what the needs are from a campaigning or policy point of view, and from a patient need point of view, and what's there. Because what's not covered in the gap between that is what we need to commission as a community. So we have a role there, but also quite a lot of academic work is written in quite detailed and opaque academic language, as is entirely appropriate, but that's not digestible. So I think we have a role to play in making it digestible and helping people navigate what's out there. At the moment, we rely too much on individuals, experienced people that have been in the field for a long time. Every time I talk to Jane Duff, she sends me another 5 papers. But it would be fantastic to capture that somehow, not in a comprehensive fashion. I think there are other methods that academia required, but from a patient or a person with lived experience point of view, what are the key pieces of work that have been done, and how does that relate to them, and how do we create a timeline, and how do we know what has been done but is out of date and needs updating? So there's a big piece around navigating what's out there, and that is linked to the translation piece, which is making it digestible and making it compelling to people with a lived experience, so they can understand what work is being done, and what impact it is relevant to them. I also reflected on the innovation piece, because innovation quite often is thought of in terms of technology. But I see, as a patient, pieces of innovation that are happening within existing healthcare settings that are not widely known outside of those particular healthcare settings. I'll give you two examples. One is perhaps a little trivial, but I think pertinent. And the other one is kind of much more consequential. The first one was before I even started working at SA, I went to a Mascot conference, and there was an initiative that Stanmore had conducted around their how they provided makeup and hairdressing for their inpatients, and their pamper parlor, I think it was called, and how it made a big difference to the experience and the morale and the mental health of female patients. And they still do it. And the reason they still do it is because it's still relevant, still has an impact on the people they care for. But they're the only centre that has done it. And it kind of just makes me think that that's either a good idea and should be rolled out, or it's not a good idea, in which case nobody, and that's fine. You innovate, and sometimes you find things aren't worth doing, you stop. And there just doesn't seem yet to be that sharing of evidence that leads to the best practice that is being incrementally made. It's a very fractured environment. And then I was thinking of the more consequential one, which is the CES pathway, which was arguably an innovation. And it was promoted and disseminated by Getting It Right First Time, GIRFT. But it's not been adopted. So there's even the health and care systems that have ways of disseminating best practice don't seem effective. So when we're talking about research and innovation, sometimes we think it can be I think we've got a long way to go. And the bar, I think as one of the speakers said today, is quite low, but there's a lot of innovation there that just isn't being disseminated because there isn't process, a program of modeling and testing. So I think there's work there that we can do. And there's a very specific thing that I think as a community we need to do, which is around a patient registry, because we currently don't have one. We have a database which is a referral tool at the moment, and it needs to be made internationally relevant using the same methodology, and it needs to capture people not only that have received their injury after 2016 and are on the spinal pathway, but everybody with a spinal cord injury that's not on that pathway and was injured and still living with the condition. Because, and for two reasons. One is I just don't see how a health and care system can design itself without knowing who it's serving and how many people that it's serving. And secondly, we know by looking from the international context that Canada, for instance, in successfully instigating their national spinal cord injury strategy, one of the first things they put in place was a patient registry. So that's really my reflection on today, but generally the task for us. And it really, in summary, it's an offer, and it's the offer of this organization to work in partnership and to act as a bridge between the research and innovation community and the community that lives with the condition. And if we can do that with your assistance, in a more structured fashion, then I hope to make a small contribution to improving the lot of our community through this lens of research and innovation. I'm slightly ahead of schedule.
We have a question in the chat, Mark. If you'd
Lovely.
It's from our Carol Adcock. Should translation therefore include the theory practice gap so that this links in with our campaigns and policy work?
The theory practice gap. And what do you mean, Carol, by that?
Hi, Mark. What I mean is in our group, and I think we would all acknowledge that, I'm sure it was discussed in the other groups, is there is already a lot of good research out there, but actually getting that put into practice so it's actually is influence and the clinical practice and influence and policy, there is a huge gap in the theory to the actual practice. So if we're going to do everything, surely that comes into the translation of that research to mean that it actually gets into practice. That then links into our policy and campaigns work is what I was thinking. Should that sort of be included underneath the translation, translating it from theory to practice?
No, absolutely. That is our intention. That's why we appointed Ashley as impact manager and Lewis as health influencing and policy manager, is to create, and under the academy, is to create that link to establish what that gap is more rigorously, so that when we're talking to, for instance, NHSE and making recommendations, we can do so not only from the qualitative experience that we have working with the community, but also from a quantitative point of view. So should we? Yes, we should. I think there's a very practical issue to do with how do we capture what evidence there is out there, because I don't think we've solved that, and I think we're still looking to the community to have thoughts as to how we do that, and I think that will be one of the things that needs to come out of the call for action, because it sits in lots of different places. And we need to have an understanding of where the existing sits, but also as new research and innovation comes through, where how we can collect that and collate it in a way that is useful, navigable, and translatable for people that live with the condition. There's sorry, Claire, I'm just reading your note. The National SCL database has been referred to, and you're right, the limitations of it are as you say. And then people that are on the spinal pathway, those with cancer, CS, spinal stenosis, who you're absolutely right are not being captured, and that's why we need a registry that does capture them. Any other comments or questions? Because if not, then I'll hand over to Karen.
There was just one comment just above Claire's, Mark, from Jackie, and an implementation science and knowledge mobilization of valuable research structures for this. I think it's referring to what you were talking about with Carol.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you. As usual, I talked for longer than I thought I was going to, so apologies for that. You didn't get your time back, but Karen, I'm sure will be briefer. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm finishing off today's event, and we're sticking with some of the themes that Mark have already introduced in the sense of innovation. I'm going to very much focus on it from how can we bring innovation about using the clinical expertise that we have? Because what we do know is there's plenty of evidence out there that shows, I guess, the power and strength of those that are working in the space, understanding the challenges day to day, and also how they can, by innovation and being given the space and tools to bring about change, both small scale, systematic change, and large scale. So this is a very early look at a potential initiative that we are looking to introduce within the Frank Williams Academy. We are very much at the moment looking at how can we build a programme that identifies future leaders that are working in the clinical space, that understand the challenge and the difficulties that are being faced, that have the knowledge and skill from the clinical point of view and understand what needs to be changed, and then how can we support individuals with a programme of activity that helps to bring about that change. Now, of course, as part of preparing for today's event, we wanted to look at where this had been potentially done or being done already. And this is an initiative that two well-known charities are currently working in the space of. We've got Diabetes UK, who have been running an improvement programme now for over 10 years. In fact, they've just refreshed and relaunched their innovation and improvement programme, and they've focused on moving forward to systematic change. So how can that be captured and shared as best practice? And then there's Prostate Cancer UK as well, who currently offer a range of innovation programs. They have their Clinical Champions program, which is an 18-month program, so very similar to Diabetes UK. And then they have their short programs, which are innovation and improvement programs that happen over 12 to 14 weeks. Now, the idea of both of these programs is that they work with clinicians that are identified working in the specific areas of specialism, and there's the opportunity for them to come to the representative charities with an idea and an innovation of change that they want to bring about. And then both of the charities, so very similar in the sense of what we would be proposing, work with individuals with their trust support to basically bring that innovation to life by also supporting them with content and delivery and skills around driving change, leading change, how to work in a change space and navigate the difficulties and challenges that come with improvement and innovation and taking people on a journey, and how can we support to build leaders of the future. So it's attacked in a kind of two-pronged approach. Both of these programs have been very successful for the respective charities. Prostate Cancer very openly and publicly published the impact it's had and the thousands of men that have had their journeys, treatment, pathways massively improved as a result of the initiatives that have been driven forward by clinicians. Now, this isn't a walking advertisement for Prostate Cancer and Diabetes UK. I'm building to what I'm wanting to talk about, which is ultimately our desire is to launch a programme of a similar nature. And at the moment, we're looking somewhere between the space of a short programme, which would be somewhere between 12 to 20 weeks. For me, 12 weeks seemed a very short period of time in order to bring about and demonstrate and record the impact of any change. So for me, 20 weeks feels more of a realistic and manageable period to be able to demonstrate small-scale change. Because ultimately a programme of this nature, of this duration, would be looking very much at specific areas of concern and challenge within, for example, a major trauma centre or a spinal cord injury centre that would, that would bring about recorded change for that area more specifically. It would be aimed at all clinicians working across spinal cord injury. And the idea of it would be that they come with a project idea or concept in mind that they would then be supported to work through over the 20-week period. And then, of course, there's been plenty of evidence that a Champions programme of a slightly longer duration would also be very successful in this space as well. Now, the idea of a programme of a 12 or an 18-month duration is that it would focus on larger scale change, capturing areas of where good practice has happened in the space of change and how that could be shared with other areas, so that it's not reinventing the wheel, and ultimately it's being shared and potentially adopted in other areas. Again, this would be open to all clinicians working across SCI, and it would, as I said already, focus on large-scale change and examples of good practice. Now, of course, to encourage people to take on, and we know that, and we had a conversation in my breakout group around time allocation on work plans, and of course I absolutely understand that possibly many of you are sat there thinking, well, how would this be possible? And the success of the other programs that have been delivered by other charities is that there is that buy-in from a person's trust, organisation, wherever they're representing. And that buy-in is important, because ultimately not only would there need to be the confirmation and the release of time in order to be able to attend the educational content and delivery, but there'd also need to be the buy-in and support that the project or area of improvement is being recognised as an area of need, and ultimately being supported also by the trust or organisation. So that would be built in as part and parcel of the process. And of course, the other area that's really important in this space is making sure that we're equipping people to be able to undertake and take on a programme where, of course, there may be and tends to be resistance to change and reluctance for potentially colleagues and other areas within an organisation to proactively be involved. So, of course, we would complement both programmes with learning on change leadership, system leadership, improvement, science, and ultimately how to approach delivering an improvement project in this space. So individuals wouldn't be working alone, and of course they would have the support of the Spinal Injuries Association, which again, some of the success from the other programs has been brought about because often in this space and innovation, the support of a leading charity that specialises in that area is the difference that helps to bring about change, because it's recognised that these individuals are working in partnership with us as a charity. We're supporting their initiative and their innovation, and we're ultimately delivering and supporting them to bring about change on either a small scale or a large scale focus. The reason why I wanted to share this, because I feel particularly excited about the opportunity, but I also wanted to get initial thoughts, feedback, questions, comments, because of course it is a very new space for us to be working in. And at the moment, we're in a very luxurious place that we are starting to build what this programme could look like. And therefore, it felt amiss of me not to bring it to today's session, given we were talking about research and innovation, and not take the opportunity to get some initial thoughts, feedback, and any questions that people might have. So I wanted to give an overview of what this opportunity looked like. So I'm going to pause there because I want to give open up the space for there to be any questions or comments. I have to say I can't see the chat area, so if one of my colleagues could help me out, that would be fantastic. I don't know if there's been any questions, Karen.
No, not at the moment, no.
Okay, so don't leave me stranded out here on a limb on the last part of the afternoon. Is there any questions? And does anyone want to take themselves off mute and have a chat and tell me what you think to the idea and the concept? Anything at all?
There are a couple of questions now in the chat. One is from Harvey asking how would these projects be funded? How will the science be evaluated?
Right,
and
so-
Jackie McRae has asked the question, is this linked to credits or qualifications?
Great, both very good questions. And I can definitely speak from the previous organisation charities that I've spoken about and the programmes that they operated. They weren't accredited, and I do think they missed a trick there. And in fact, prostate cancer were in the process of accrediting and assigning points to their programme. So, I mean, for me, it feels like that would be a very good place to ensure that that's available and where we start to look. So absolutely, that is absolutely more achievable with the longer term programme, the 12 to 18 month structure, because we're able to more easily evidence the delivery, the content, what the processes involved, the touch points of those, because there would be various action learning groups as part of that, various one-to-ones, some discovery and coaching opportunities as part of the provision as well. So the 12 to 18 months is definitely something that we would look at from an points and accreditation respect. Hope that answers the question from that point of view. Jackie's put her hand up. I don't know if it relates to the same point, and I'm happy to take the question if that's the case.
Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to get my camera on. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
It was just too huge to start typing in, but I was wondering whether you thought about, if you're looking at clinicians doing this, whether it could sit alongside other clinical training. So there are things like advanced clinical practice, and I sit in that education space as well. And I think spinal cord injury could be weaved into that. And then again, we're looking at developing a workforce, so they're not just quick fixes. It's always about sustainability and what do we do with these people once they've gone through this. Where are they going to go? And we need to keep them there and growing all of this. But yeah,
great, thank you, that's really helpful. So thank you for those points. And I absolutely take your point around sustainability and making sure that what we set up it ticks that box because there's nothing, and I think certainly with some of the other charities, some of their earlier missed opportunities were that they had lots of clinicians applying to do the same thing over and over again. And actually the success of the program started to come when they were able to start capturing that and share it as examples of good practice, because it was becoming adopted far quicker, and therefore the sustainability and the growth of that was the real turning point from that respect. So I think it's a really, really good point.
and linking up with NIHR as research funders, which again, a lot of charities are doing now, but it might be too soon to do that, but yeah.
No, thank you. I think that's really helpful. So thank you for that. I'm conscious, Mark said that there were a couple of questions. I feel I've answered the one around the accreditation. And I know that one of them was around funding and how would this be funded. So let me start by talking about that. This is something that we are exploring funding for actively. So this is something that we are going to go away and package up as a funded offer that we would want to be exploring and making available to clinicians. Now, of course, in an ideal world, I would want to be saying that that would be at no cost to an individual or to an organisation. And that's, of course, the ideal model that I would want to build and be able to offer. I'm not in a position to 100% say that at the moment. So, I mean, we are exploring funded and fundable routes that we can go down to minimise any cost for either an individual or an organisation. And I know that there was a second part to that question, Mark. So I'm not sure if you're able to just repeat that for me.
No, I think it was how are these projects going to be funded? How will the science be evaluated?
So that's an interesting question, and actually my experience from most of the projects that have been done previously may not necessarily have focused specifically on a science aspect. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that people might not come forward with projects, initiatives, or innovation ideas that wouldn't cross into the space of science. And therefore, I guess what we would have to do is address that and I guess try and bridge that aspect as and when those situations arose. What I would say is I would actively be wanting to involve people from across the sector in the recruitment, absolutely having someone from a research space sit on the interview panel for a longer term program where people can hear the pitches of ideas and projects that are being looked and explored at. And of course, I'd want also clinical representation on that recruitment boards as well. So I think there's absolutely ways to ensure it's captured. My experience has been not necessarily the projects have fallen into the space of science specifically.
There was also a question about, have you thought about approaching Health Innovation Network? And also, how long have the diabetes and prostate cancer programs been running?
Great. So it would be great to approach the Health Innovations Network. So absolutely. Thank you for that, whoever suggested that. To the second part of the question, which is how long have these programs been running? So Diabetes UK have been running for over 10 years. In fact, they've just refreshed and relaunched their program to continue operating in that space. Prostate cancer have now been running for 5 years, and they're going from strength to strength with their innovation programs. So they prostate cancer run one of their 18-month programs a year, and they then run 3 to 4 of their short programs throughout the year. So they're very fortunate that they've got a whole innovation and improvement team, which is only something we can aspire to achieve, but would be a great place for us to move in the direction of.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. I'm just aware that I didn't offer my own session to questions. So if anybody in the room wants to ask me something on what I was talking about, that you'd be very welcome to put your hand up or put something in the chat.
Yes, great. Absolutely. Is there anything else? And as Mark said, please feel free to just pop your hand up, come off mute. I mean, we're coming towards the end of the day. We've got a good sized group, so that there is the ability to be able to do that.
There is an additional question, Karen, from Rob. It's presumably the research findings would have gone through a peer review process. So evaluating the science beyond that could be served by appended patient lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point, Rob. Thank you for that. One of the things that again was built into the programs was patient experience, patient voice. On many of the kickoff sessions for those programs, they invited a representation and the voice of patients, which of course, don't get me wrong, clinicians are always in the world and space of patients, and they're frequently working with them, but it gave them the opportunity to hear in that dedicated space, in particular related to if it was a themed topic or around a themed area of improvement, just how important it was to patients, individuals, loved ones, and support networks. So, you know, absolutely, I do think that's a really valid point, and it would be something we would absolutely want to embed as part of this. In fact, again, in many of the recruitment processes, there was patient voice representation on the interviews and the selection processes. And patients got to hear some of the innovation ideas and concepts that clinicians were wanting to work on. And I think at the last count, particularly with prostate cancer, it was somewhere in the region of about 650,000 patients who'd had their treatment journeys and experience around care improved directly because of the improvement programs that have taken place.
Karen, can I just add, well, more of a comment really, and I don't know if this is going to be an area of work that's been considered before or something that we could look at in the future, and that's around, you know, transitions. I think we are seeing, you know, a steady increase in the number of pediatric spinal cord injuries, and there's like, I don't know if there's going to be some work around where you transition from pediatrics to adults. Certainly the services are significantly different, and there's only one pediatric spinal cord injury centre that you can go to, and that's Stoke Mandeville, whereas the adults can go to the other spinal cord injury centres. But it's becoming apparent that there might be some difficulties in those who are injured between the ages of 16 to 18 on where they might be able to go with regards to their management, because they're in that transition age.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when it comes to, if, for example, you are technically classed as a pediatric patient at the time of injury, but at the time of discharge you're an adult, and how that kind of might affect the pathway. I don't know if there's ever been any kind of discussions around that.
No, but it does sound like a great project.
It's something that I think we've had some difficulties with recently, so I just didn't know if that's something that the SIA has actually come across before. I appreciate they're not going to be, you know, large volumes of numbers, but they're certainly going to be significant to those it affects. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think you're right. I think, I mean, if you were to look at content on our website, it heavily focuses more from an adult perspective. So I think there's work that we can do directly in that space to support with educational material and content. But I also think you're right. There's some work to be done from a transition point of view and what that looks like.
Thank you.
I'm seeing some of the comments go up, but I don't know if they're anything specific. I mean, I'm happy to give a final call for any questions for me, and then I can open the floor to any general questions about anything we've covered. Go on, Mark.
There's just one from Harvey Sauter, which is a really important one, which is we need to have a clear distinction between this initiative and the newly formed Spark UK network. We don't want to confuse already overworked clinicians. I just wanted to say, Harvey, that up 100%, absolutely. We need to, I mean, I've only just recently learned about Spark, my bad. But there just isn't, we just don't want to overlap at all. So let's keep that conversation going, and work together, not cross over at all.
Absolutely. The idea of, I mean, with any improvement and innovation program that we set up, the idea will be to reduce duplication, improve sharing of good practice, consistency of opportunity and treatment that's happening. So yes, the idea is definitely not overload or duplicate work that's happening elsewhere.
And to be honest, as we develop the program, we would want to consult with the the other charities that are active in this space, as well as significant clinicians that we have a relationship to absolutely make sure that it's a value add, not a distraction or an overlap.
And in fact, at the initial point in which prostate cancer launched their program, they actually joined forces with Bowes and Bourne in the space, so that they were working in partnership and launched the program together, so that there was very clear evidence that it was being done in partnership with, rather than in creating additional. So that is also something that we could look to explore.
Jackie's added a couple of comments. One is in response to the Spark one, which is, I think there is a space for quality improvement to refine data collection, engage stakeholders, improve prior to then research to test efficacy. There's still lots we have to do on the ground to get service established. And then a second point, there was work done as part of the London SCI network about PEDS, education content on the NHS Learning Hub. Also, Stanmore takes PEDS patients. So thanks, Jackie, for those comments. I was thinking about QI as well. I've not talked to Karen about this, but I'm just wondering, in response to the funding questions, whether or not it could be linked to Trust's QI projects. And I haven't got a clue how that might happen, but I do know that they are funded initiatives, and if we were linking up in some way, it might be a way of doing co-applications or something like that.
Great. All of those points and questions have been very helpful. So thank you very much to everybody that's contributed. I am really wanting to ensure that we finish on time. So I'm keen to take the opportunity to open the floor up to any general questions that anyone might have. And the panel are still on, so please do take the opportunity to ask anything about anything you've seen this afternoon that maybe you want some additional clarity or information on.
I think we've tired them out.
I am a firm believer that time is the best gift of all, and to finish slightly early is definitely better than running over and finish later. Ashley, I'm happy to hand back to you for any closing thoughts and to just run through the kind of next steps from the point of view of the survey and the feedback that would be really helpful.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you so much to everyone for attending, taking part in the breakout rooms, engaging with the panel. It's all been really insightful on our end, and I imagine it's been helpful as well to just hear everyone else's experiences. You'll see the Academy Zoom link. We've attached a feedback form, and there's also a QR code on the next slide. And we'd really appreciate getting your feedback from how the event went. We've also put our email there in order to, if you have any questions, comments that you want to share with us, you're more than welcome to. Claire's asked if the comments will, from the breakout room, be, yes, they will be. So we have the recording of the main room, and additionally, all the facilitators were taking notes from your comments in the breakout rooms. Those will be collated and shared at a later date. So again, we're really thankful for everyone's contributions in those, and it'll be really good to see all of those come together. But yeah, again, really, we would really appreciate it if you could fill out the post-event feedback form, and we'll be on here for a bit longer if anyone has any additional questions. But as Karen said, time is the best gift. So if there are no questions, you are free to go. Or Rob has a final thought. Can a ChatGPT model wade through SCI data? So would that be a Google sponsorship? reference NHS data in Google. Would you be able to give me a bit more context on what you mean, Rob?
Well, if we've got vast amounts of data, it's very intensive to go through it and work out which is the what could be drawn from it. So can an AI model help determine what questions should be asked, or what questions can be answered by all that data? Really, I know that Google use NHS big data to try and analyze outcomes on best practice treatments, and bit of genome research perhaps as well. Can the same be applied to the data we're looking at?
So I think Rob, it's a good question. I think what I would say is that I don't think we have the data in place to take advantage of those things. So I think that there is obviously some fragmented data that could be run through models, but I think it's very limited. Obviously, these types of tools will provide opportunities to be able to do systematic reviews very quickly on literature. So there is that opportunity. I think you can even do that now with some of the primitive models over there. So if you want to ask a question, rather than commissioning a postdoc or a PhD student to go away and do a systematic review over 12 months and get it written up, you can do it now with a prompt. I think the real challenge for us is to lay down the data architectures that we need to collect the information we want to answer the questions we want to ask.
Yeah, and linking all those data sets together, I'd imagine, as well.
I think that's easier than it used to be. I think if you ask that, I would agree with you about 10 years ago, but I think where we are today, I mean, although it's quite controversial, but Palantir, for example, have their MITs in the NHS at the moment. Their tooling effectively ingests all of the data and is able to integrate that relatively quickly. So I think that's less of a challenge into data integration. I think good quality data collection is actually paramount.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And of course, classifying it, because if it's not mapped to a taxonomy of some kind, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you mean machine readable, I presume?
Well, dictionaries, data dictionaries, right? So
Yeah.
for this piece of data, what does this data mean? If we're going to integrate across different repositories,
I see.
You need to be able to map across them, otherwise they're useless. So some really great stuff has been done by NACTIN and MSCI, where they've been able to map the two repositories, and we can learn from them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. That was really insightful. Are there any other questions at all?
No, it seems not. Thank you so much to everyone that's joined us this evening. The QR code will stay on the screen. The discussion, contributions, questions have been very much appreciated, and have an enjoyable rest of the evening, slightly earlier than planned.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.